Welcome to what my wife affectionately calls Dad Does Dinner. Over the next 3 days, we're going to be cooking a brisket. My brother calls this the hokey pokey brisket. That's because we put it in the fridge, we take it out of the fridge, onto the smoker, back in the fridge, back on the smoker. Now keep in mind, this is coming from a guy who used an electric smoker for years. Now in his defense, he has grown a pair and finally bought a real smoker. Well, we're going to start with just your regular Packer style brisket. This is 10 pounds. Now you can get whatever kind of grade that you like. I just go with the select. We're going to be adding enough spice and enough smoke to this and cooking it over enough time that it's going to become real tender. So I don't think you really need to buy the choice or even the Wagyu style brisket. Now the first thing we're going to do is you're going to put this on a baker's rack over a sheet pan and cover it with your favorite rub. This is my favorite rub. I like a wire whisk to mix it up, keeps it nice and keeps it from getting all clumpy. In my rub is a cup of brown sugar, an eighth to a fourth a cup of salt. Start out with an eighth and add more salt to taste. And then about an eighth to a fourth a cup of pepper, a tablespoon of smoked paprika, a tablespoon of onion powder, and a tablespoon of garlic. Now I know the Texas style brisket is just done with salt and pepper. Now I've worked for years perfecting this recipe. I've tried the Texas style myself. It's just not my preference. But whatever style of rub you like, mix it up, and that amount right there will be able to allow you to generously cover the whole brisket. I use this kind of rub for all my barbecue. Sometimes I'll add a little cayenne if I want it a little spicier, and I usually reserve that for ribs. I generally don't like spice with my barbecue. Now I like to start the rub putting the fat side down, the fat cap down, and then just take the rub and generously put it on. You want to cover it and make sure the entire brisket is covered with a generous about an 1/8 inch layer of the rub. Now I've got the brisket generously covered with my spice rub, and I'm going to put this in the refrigerator, and I like to do that for at least 12 hours, a little longer if you can. Now if you just don't have the fridge room or you don't have the time to spend 3 days cooking a brisket, you can do this whole process in about 16 to 18 hours. I wouldn't recommend any less time than this. But it's Friday night now. I'm gonna do cooking tomorrow and finish it on Sunday, and it's gonna come out to be a perfect brisket. Now you notice that I didn't trim any of the fat off of this brisket. I've tried trimmed brisket before. I just think this cooks better when you leave the fat all on it. It renders down through the meat. It makes for a more flavorful, moist meat. I do recommend putting this on the baker's rack over the sheet pan so that way that air can circulate in and around the brisket as opposed to it just sitting in its own juices. As this sits in the refrigerator overnight, it will leach out some of the juices from the meat. Don't worry, it's not drying out your meat. It's just going through its chemical process and letting those seasonings really get into the meat. We're done for the night. I'll see you in the morning.
Good morning. Our brisket's been in the refrigerator for about 12 hours and we're ready to get the fire going. Now I just use a standard offset smoker, nothing fancy about it. And I started out by using some lump charcoal and a charcoal chimney. Now the wood I like to burn when I do barbecue is post oak. Post oak burns hot, it burns long, and it gives you a real good flavor. Now, some of y'all like mesquite, a native Texas wood. I find mesquite makes my barbecue way too bitter. Now I do like to do a steak over a hot mesquite fire, but when it comes to smoking, I like post oak. If I can't find post oak, hickory will do in a pinch. I really like the flavor of pecan, but I do find that pecan burns a little at a little lower heat, and it takes a lot longer for me to get things done. So sometimes I combine the post oak and the pecan, but generally I just use post oak. I got the charcoal chimney lit up. I use natural lump charcoal in this, and I use a charcoal chimney because you don't need any kind of lighter fluid or any other accelerant to get it going. When using accelerant, especially when you're smoking something, some lighter fluid, you may end up with a slight lighter fluid taste in whatever you're smoking. So I use a charcoal chimney and I don't have to worry about that at all. Okay, our fire's been going for about 20 minutes now, so it's time to empty the charcoal chimney. Get you a nice set of Weber gloves. This will really help you out in your barbecue process. So simply pick up the chimney and dump it in. I got a good hot bed of coals, and this will get my fire going really nicely. I got my oak. I like to start out with 2 of these logs and just put it right on the fire. Now that's a good size log for me to use. I can get those at my local HEB. Academy also has some really good wood. I do like HEB because it is about half the price of Academy. Now, I know a lot of you out there use a pellet grill or an electric grill, and that's fine. It will produce just good, fine barbecue. But if you just want to set it and forget it, what kind of pitmaster are you? All right, I got my logs on. I'm gonna let them burn for about 20 minutes, and it'll get to the point where I'm ready to add my brisket. Now for cooking brisket, I like to do it at between 200 and 250 degrees. Now this took a lot of trial and tribulation, and believe me, when I first started doing brisket, I made some good smoky flavored leather. Now you'll notice when I start, I got all the vents wide open. That's so I can get as much air flowing and get that wood really burning. Depending on the time of day, the weather, the humidity, will affect how much I open and close those vents as I do the cook. I like to cook my brisket between 200 and 250 degrees. Find that's what makes the best tasting meat. All right, the fire's been going for about 20 minutes. It's about to the point I like it, so we're gonna put the brisket on the smoker. So we got the brisket on the smoker. We got the fat cap facing up and the point of the brisket towards the open end of the fire. That side takes just a little more heat, and that thicker part of the brisket will take that heat much better. So we're going to close it up and get to smoking. And at this point, I generally close my vent door just a little bit. Still want some good airflow in there, but not as much as I did before, because I want to start to control this temperature. Now, if you're a beer drinker, now's the time you can crack open a cold one. However, pace yourself. This is a long and slow process. All right, we're all wrapped up now. When you wrap it up, you want to seal it really well on the sides, but I like to leave it a little loose on top. It still lets a little bit of that smoke in. I found that I like 6 hours of good full smoke, and then after this, I leave the full just a little bit loose so a little bit more smoke can get in through the rest of the process. Now I'm going to go for about another 6 hours like this with it wrapped up. Remember, you want kind of a loose wrap. You don't want it tight pressing up next to the meat. You want to, still let some convection occur inside of the foil, and you're well on your way. Now, if you've been drinking all day up to this point, you might want to just go ahead and put this in a 180 degree oven so you don't have to worry about catching yourself on fire. So we had 6 hours smoked, 6 hours wrapped and smoked for a total of 12 hours on the smoker. At this point, I put it back on the baker's rack and the sheet tray, and I put it into the refrigerator. Ideally, I like to put it in the fridge for 12 hours. In this case, since I've got an early morning and I've got to slice the brisket and have it ready to go by 9 o'clock, it'll stay in my fridge about 8 hours. I've found that this makes for a more tender brisket and a juicier brisket. After 8 hours in the fridge, I'm going to put it in a 200 degree oven for another 4 hours. Good morning. After I put the brisket in the fridge for about 8 hours, I pulled it out early this morning and put it in a 200 degree oven for 4 hours. After that, I let it rest for about 45 minutes. It's always best to let your meat rest between 30 minutes and an hour. Now, we're going to slice it.
Get yourself a good meat knife. Get the best knife you can afford. It doesn't have to be too expensive. And with a brisket, you always want to slice against the grain. Now, brisket is two muscles that's come together, and the two muscles, the grain runs opposite directions on these. So here's what I found the easiest way to slice your brisket. And I credit my brother for this one. Take your knife and cut it in half long ways. Feels pretty tender. Once you get that cut made, you can see right here where the muscles come together. Just take your knife, slide it right through there. Pull that off. Now I like to use this part for chopped beef. And then you just slice up your brisket. Now, let's have a taste. It's tender, juicy, smoky. That bark's got a little bit of sweet, a little bit of salt to it. Came out just perfect. I promise you this is better than anything you can get at any barbecue joint you go to. All right, y'all. Happy smoking.